Good evening. This is Dr. Menzo, Superintendent of the Wallingford Public School District. Welcome to our special Board of Education meeting on Monday, May 4th, 2020 at 6:15 p.m. I'm going to turn it over to the board chair, Ms. Levack.
Thank you, Dr. Menzo. I call this meeting to order. Before we begin, and for the record, I'd like to indicate that Mr. Reynolds will not be joining us this evening due to a death in his family. So we're sorry to hear that. The first order of business is an executive session for the purpose of discussion of acceptance of resignations. I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mrs. Corso, seconded by Mrs. Castelli. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion has passed. We're in executive session.
Two, one, go.
I'll entertain a motion to come out of executive session.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We're out of executive session. I'll entertain a motion for approval of acceptance of resignations. Mrs. Corso and Mrs. Purcell. Mrs. Corso, you need to turn your mic on, please.
Sorry.
Thank
That was
you.
on, sorry. Okay. I make a motion that the Board of Education accept the resignation of Blair Stokes effective June 30, 2020. Blair Stokes is a middle school science teacher from March 2017 through June 2018 and an elementary teacher since August 2018.
Patty Purcell seconds the motion.
Thank you. Any
Thank you.
discussion? Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Next, I make a motion that the Board of Education accept the resignation of Deborah Klaus-Huskus effective June 30, 2020. She's been a special education teacher since August 2016.
Patty Purcell seconds the motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Lastly, I make a motion that the Board of Education accept the resignation of Brian Tracy effective June 30, 2020. Brian Tracy has been a school counselor since August 2017.
Patty Purcell seconds the motion.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries.
Thank you. If there's no further business of an official nature to come before this board, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
You're on mute.
At this time, we have to pause because our next meeting is not scheduled to start for another 7 minutes.
Right.
Hi, this is Dr. Menzo again. We are now moving into our instructional committee meeting at this time, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Corso.
Thank you, Dr. Menzo. And welcome to the May 4th Instructional Committee meeting. Officially calling this meeting to order. Our first order of business is to accept minutes from the Instructional Committee meeting dated April 6th, 2020. Is there any discussion on those minutes? Okay, so we'll start with Ms. Allenson.
Yes.
Going across the top. Ms. Levesque,
Yes.
Ms. Castelli,
Yes.
Mr. Votto,
Yes.
Ms. Purcell,
Yes.
Mr. Ross,
Yes.
Ms. Raccio,
Yes.
and Corso, yes. So those minutes are approved. Our next order of business, we have some curriculum units to discuss tonight. So the first two are for mathematics. So I'll turn it over to Mrs. Medancy.
Hi, everyone. So the mathematics units that you see for Math for Technology, Design, and Innovation, it was a collaborative effort between the math department and the CTE department with Rob Covey supporting this work. This is the brand new course that you all approved last year that we are implementing next year for our high school seniors elective. We had hoped to get all 6 units of study ready to you, but with the distance learning and losing the PD day in March, the first 2 units are complete and ready to go, and we're hoping to finish the last 4 units over the summer for implementation next year. So a lot of this is, you'll see the math content in these units, but the biggest piece is the application of the content to the manufacturing field and CTE courses.
Ms. Medancy, are those 2 half-year courses?
It's a full year course, so the 6 units will be over the course of a full year. The other units, fundamentals of algebra, geometry, principles of area and volume, and then principles of trigonometry are very meaty and very application based. So that's going to be where the bulk of our time will be spent.
Thank you. Any discussion? Any questions for Mrs. Medancy? We can do like the first graders do. They go like this when they have a question. That's what they do. Put their little thumbs up. Okay, so let's take consensus starting with Miss Allenson. Yes, thank you.
Sorry.
Ms. Levesque,
Yes.
Ms. Castelli,
Yes.
Mr. Votto,
Yes.
Ms. Purcell,
Yes.
Mr. Ross,
Yes.
Ms. Raccio,
Yes.
and Corso, yes. Thank you. Christy, do you want to talk about the textbook?
Yes, so the textbook is for this course as well. Because it's a brand new course, we needed to purchase a textbook. Part of the proposal that I have for the textbook includes a 6-year ebook subscription, which through Cengage Learning, they call it MindTap. It's a MindTap bundle. Part of that bundle includes what they call a reader piece where students can highlight, add their own notes, create flashcards online through the ebook. It also does have speaking features where it will read aloud the text as part of that bundle through the Cengage. Mr. Covey was a key member of selecting the book in conjunction with the colleges that we are working with for dual enrollment. So a big piece of selecting the book was that dual enrollment piece.
Yes, for the dual enrollment, the course, the textbook is actually the textbook that is used also at like the Housatonic Community College, Goodwin, who we're aligning the curriculum with as well. So it was a big piece in choosing the textbook as well. In addition to the fact that when we looked at the several other texts, it was the text that we did prefer ourselves as well.
Thank you. Are they getting credit? Is it a dual enrolled course yet, or is it on its way to be that?
It
Once
will be.
it
Go
will
ahead,
be.
Rob. I'm sorry.
I was going to say once it's in place, that's what we'll submit the instructors and the curriculum to the community colleges for approval, and that's the goal, that we should be able to get that in place for students.
Awesome.
As
Thank
we've
you.
been
For
writing
the-
the curriculum, we've also been, making sure that we had the college curriculum and the college course outline at the table. So it's not something we're ignoring, but we're not just completely following exactly what they did. So
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's start with Ms. Allenson. Yes,
Yes. Sorry.
There you go.
my mute
Thank
not
you.
working.
Ms. Levesque,
Yes.
Ms. Castelli,
Yes.
Mr. Votto,
Yes.
Ms. Purcell,
Yes.
Mr. Ross.
yes,
Thank you. Ms. Raccio?
Yes.
Of course, so yes. Thank you both very much.
yes.
thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you. Be well.
You too.
Thank you. So C, D, and E on our agenda are all language, so world languages. So why don't we do, can we do them together? Would everybody be okay if we did those together? I'll let Mrs. Moore.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Moore.
Maybe talking about AP Italian on its own, but we can
All right.
definitely talk about the other two together. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay, go ahead.
So our first agenda item is the proposed curriculum for AP Italian, which will be a new course for us next year. You all approved it as a course addition last year, and this is the curriculum that's actually put forward by the College Board. So it's very robust and it has a lot to offer. There are 6 themes that every world language and culture course embeds. You can see those themes on page 14, and they're broken out into about 6 or 7 week units. And if you scroll down to page 19, it's exciting for us to see that the skills and learning objectives that the College Board has put forward align directly with the standards and indicators that we've written here in Wallingford. So page 19 starts out with interpretive and cultural skills and objectives. Page 20 goes into interpersonal. Page 21 goes into presentational. And those are sort of, you'll see those as kind of the cornerstone of every one of the 6 units. And if you are able to scroll through a little bit more, each unit has a lot of live links that the College Board puts forward, which is wonderful on many levels. They're very current, and as soon as a link becomes either out of date because it's irrelevant or because it just becomes an inactive link, the College Board is constantly revising these things, and it's actually so robust in terms of the resources that are here that we won't need to supplement this curriculum with a textbook. So we're able to just kind of use everything that the College Board puts forward to supplement the learning experience for our students. And this is something that the College Board updates annually. So we'll be able to kind of jump in there every summer and every fall and see what additions and deletions they made. But we're sort of lucky on this front that the College Board puts forward such a robust curriculum for the course.
Thank you. Any questions on Italian? Ms. Castelli? Unmute.
I was trying to do it with you're supposed to be able to hit the space bar, but that didn't work. Anyway, so I'm glad you explained, Kim, that fits their curriculum, because when I clicked on it, I was like a little blown away by what I saw, and I said that was going to be my question. So as long as I'm glad to hear that it does align with everything. So I guess it's a win-win.
It
You don't
does.
have the right curriculum.
Right, and they actually encourage you not to reinvent the wheel because they have such a dynamic force of people who are keeping current with all of those links and resources. The textbook companies are actually a little bit behind with some languages with aligning to the 6 themes. It's newer that the College Board has chosen these 6 themes. So Spanish was kind of the first that the textbook companies tackled and aligned with, and then French. And they're isn't a resource out there just yet that our teachers felt like there are actually only 11 other towns in the state that offer AP Italian. So in reaching out to them to say, what resource do you kind of use as your bedrock? It was all over the place. And in getting samples from those, we just didn't feel like anything was something that we wanted to hang our hat on just yet. So there's such a wealth of information that the College Board provides us right here. And they're encouraging you to adopt it rather than kind of try to retrofit it to a format that you might have.
So just another question, do they do that with other AP courses as well? Have we looked at exploring, not just in your, in your purview, but across the curriculum that where we're offering AP courses, is that's an avenue we should be looking at to help reduce the amount of time we're spending writing curriculum?
I don't want to speak out of turn, and Carrie Latour may be able to say more than me, but I do know that a computer programming course, or some, if Rob were still here, he would know the exact title. But this was the route that course went in the fall.
Sorry, when you approved AP Computer Science in the fall as a course, we also used the curriculum that was recommended by the College Board for our course for the fall, including the textbook. In that case, it wasn't an actual physical textbook. It was a resource that was provided online, recommended by the College Board as well to go along with that course. So yes, to answer your question, we do use the College Board curriculum.
Good.
Great. Any other questions on Italian? So let's take consensus, starting with Ms. Allenson.
Yes.
Ms. Levesque,
Yes.
Ms. Castelli,
Yes.
Mr. Votto,
But of course, yes.
Patel,
Yes.
Mr. Ross, Mr.
Yes.
Ross, thank you. Ms. Raccio?
Yes.
And Corso, yes. So thank you for
Yes.
Italian. Next is Spanish and French.
Yeah.
Okay. So both Spanish 1 and French 1, well, the curricular revisions to those, these have been in existence for a long time in our district, and AP Italian were all approved by our management team on April 23rd. So Spanish and French 1 are unique courses in that they are, they're offered in middle school as well as high school. And so we call them A, B, and C in middle school just so that we don't get confused, because they don't, once we get past level 1, the B and C no longer align with the 2 and 3. So it's just kind of a naming thing that we've done in our department. If you've seen A/1 or 1/A. So the essential questions are overarching, and a lot of times they're applicable to a lot of the same languages, a lot of languages, especially Romance languages. So if you got a chance to kind of overlay the two courses, you'll see that a lot of the essential questions are sometimes the same. How does knowing grammatical patterns in one language influence your ability to learn a second? How does Latin influence these two languages? How does the choice between and the when you're talking make a difference? And then there are nuanced pieces depending on the language, but a lot of our essential questions are the same in the beginning for languages. Similarly with the themes that you'll see here. So as you're beginning to learn a new language, talking about yourself and your family and your likes and your school day and your leisure activities and things like that. So there is a lot that we can draw on one from the other as we're building kind of these building blocks of learning a language. And if you were able to scroll through and see, this is a newer template that the curriculum department adopted this year. So if you were to look at it in a unit, you'll see that there are, 15, 16 different lessons that are kind of spelled out. Some of those lessons are pretty meaty, and it's very probable that they will take more than one day to tackle. Just thinking of one of the lessons in French 3, it talks about describing yourself and asking questions about other people and personality traits and physical traits. So a lot of times when we think about those lessons, they're more learning targets and objectives that sometimes are going to take us a week, if not more, to get past the exposure point and sort of start to move towards mastery. So there are those lessons there with our Wallingford indicators and standards aligned with suggested learning experiences and formative assessments for the teacher to use as he or she is moving along.
Ms. Levesque?
Aaron?
Yep, Ms. Levesque?
I just wanted to compliment Ms. Latour and the curriculum leaders regarding the new format for the curriculum. I find it's very easy to review, and it follows a nice pattern.
Thank you. And we've gotten great feedback from the teachers that have been writing with us this year. We've never, well, in the world language department, we've never drilled down to kind of thinking about things from day to day at the lesson level. So at the outset, that felt a little bit daunting, but you really do start to look at things in a different way. And like you're saying, Mrs. Levesque, it's more user friendly if somebody were to just pick it up and try to figure out what we might be doing.
For sure. I really think it's a big benefit.
Any other questions?
I just want to make one comment, Mrs. Corso, in regards to the new template. You'll notice that as curriculum is being revised in its entirety, it will move towards the new template. But when curriculum is sectioned where there's updates to a particular unit, if the entirety of the curriculum is in the old template, that one unit will still be in the old until it's completely revised, just so that it's consistent and the same for our teachers to utilize throughout the teaching of the course.
Thank you, Mrs. Latour. Any other questions or comments on French or Spanish 1? Let's take consensus. We'll start with Ms. Allenson.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Levesque?
Yes.
Ms. Castelli?
Yes.
Mr. Votto?
Yes.
Ms. Purcell?
Sorry, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Ross? Mr. Ross? We're having audio trouble with Mr. Ross. Ms.
Yes.
Raccio? Oh, thank you, Mr. Ross.
Yes.
Ms. Raccio?
Yes.
My mic is
Thank
on.
you.
Is that coming through? Yes.
It's just a little laggy.
Yes.
I think you're just a little behind, that's all. Thank you. And Corso is yes. So thank you very much, Ms. Moore.
Thank you.
Next up is a grade 8 ELA unit on critical literacy, unlocking contemporary fiction. Ms. Laudadio.
Hi, good evening.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes, so this is the final unit, reading unit. I had brought forward 6th grade, 7th grade, and 2 of the 8th grade units over the last year that are currently being implemented. And this unit was still under development. So this is the final unit for the middle school reading units. And this last one is, as Mrs. Corso said, it's entitled Critical Literacy, Unlocking Contemporary Fiction. It's a unit that really centers on award-winning current and contemporary authors for students. And it has themes relating to let's see here, deepening understanding of characters, settings, and conflicts, while taking a look at relevant cultural, relevant issues going on today with cultural relevance that kids can relate to. I don't know if anybody.
Thank you, Ms. Laudadio. Does anybody have any questions?
I do have a question. I just want to make sure.
Ms. Levesque?
Yes, because some of these items, some of the books explore, thought-provoking yet sensitive topics. I
Yes.
just want to reiterate and make sure that, I know the parents get the paragraph regarding what the book is about, and
Yeah.
just to make sure that if they feel it's not a book that might be for their student, that they have that opportunity to speak with the teacher or opt their child out of that particular book and maybe into something else.
Yes, we absolutely do. And in fact, I think through the process of bringing the other middle school units to the Board of Ed, have been very thoughtful about what we include in the description that goes to parents so that they don't have to do a lot of searching on their own, but will be able to see in what's provided to them if they're sensitive or mature material. And I do want to, I want to give a shout out to teachers who have been doing a lot of personalized communication with parents beyond even the unit letter that goes home whenever they have a book selection that might contain mature information. And they've been working really closely with me as well. It's gone very well.
Yes, I appreciate the more detailed paragraphs that are going home so that the parent can get a real sense of what the book is about. And some of them, like I said, are very thought-provoking, but some are sensitive. And so I think the parent is the best judge if that's going to have an impact on their particular student.
Definitely. And this unit is actually going to be implemented later in the year as well, so that teachers will know students and families well in order to help coach kids into good selections with book club titles.
I appreciate that. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Votto?
Just to make that clear, so parents decide whether or not they want their child to read a particular book. Is that correct?
Yes, usually teachers work with students to select their top choices of a book club selection, and then the parents are notified of which book club selections are going to be used in a unit, and then have an opportunity to discuss further with the teacher if they would prefer their students not read a certain title.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Ms. Purcell, did you have your hand up or no? No. Okay, thank you. So let's take consensus. We'll start with Ms. Allenson.
Yes.
Ms. Levesque,
Yes.
Ms. Castelli,
Yes.
Mr. Votto,
Yes.
Ms. Purcell,
Yes.
Mr. Ross,
Yes. Yes.
thank you. Ms. Raccio?
Yes.
Thank you. And Corso is yes. Our next item on the agenda is grade 7 historical fiction book club unit.
Yes. This unit came forward for adoption last year. It was implemented this year, and after implementing it for the first go around, the teachers and I worked together to fine tune the book offerings in this unit, as the unit really has students becoming an expert in a particular time period through the books they're reading. And so we needed to identify some additional titles for the time periods of the Civil War, the Civil Rights, Revolutionary War, and World War II. So these are some additional titles to add to the unit to expand the capability of the teachers in order for students to be able to do that.
Thank you. Questions? Mr. Votto?
I love the books, Carrie.
Thank you.
I think they're very appropriate. I did not hear your first few words. You said that something was implemented.
This unit was implemented this year already.
The particular unit.
This particular unit, but the teachers and the students are supposed to work together in their book clubs to become an expert on a particular historical time period.
Okay.
And so we identified certain time periods we needed additional titles for.
The other thing I wanted to say, two things. First of all, I think some of those titles could also be used in 8th grade. And so I hope there's going to be some articulation between 7th and 8th grade history teachers, because like they're doing the Civil War in 8th grade, and you have a book I noticed on the Civil War. It would be nice if there was a little, instead of maybe using that in 7th grade, use it in 8th grade. It's always good to supplement your lesson with a novel of some type.
For sure.
Just a suggestion. Now the other thing is, are we going to be are we still revising the social studies curriculum on the middle school level in any way?
We are. We actually have two units for 6th grade and 2 units for 7th grade coming to you next month. Okay. We were hoping to get more done, but with the occurring of the distance learning this spring, it was not possible for us to finish. But we'll at least have 2 units out of 4 for each grade for you to review in June.
I'm just a little concerned about the 8th grade. I don't think it goes far enough. It stops just on immigration, I believe, on U.S. history. So I was just concerned about that. I like to see the kids get a little more into the 20th century.
So
I know
interestingly,
they get it
we
again in
are
high school, but
we are also bringing U.S. history grade 11 in June. We haven't needed to take a look at grade 8 yet, but it does end up being pretty set in the time period because it's between 5th and 11th.
what was that again?
We're going to be bringing some of the grade 11 U.S. history units forward as well in June. And you'll see that we are taking a much more contemporary approach with that curriculum, but we haven't really reviewed grade 8 this year.
Okay,
Thank you. Any other questions?
we'll talk again.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, let's take consensus starting with Ms. Allenson.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms.
Yes.
Levesque?
Yes.
Ms. Castelli?
Yes.
Mr. Votto?
Yes.
Ms. Purcell?
Yes.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Raccio?
Yes.
And Corso is yes. And lastly, grade 7, investigating characterization and author study unit.
Yep. So similar to my last item, this unit was approved last spring. It was implemented this year in grade 7 English language arts. And we had a fantastic outcome in that our students not only read more than they usually do, but we ran short on certain authors that this is an author study unit. And so when I reviewed how things were progressing with the new units with the grade 7 ELA team, we identified these authors as needing at least an additional title to offer to students for next year so that they can continue the author study theme with this unit. So that's how these titles were selected and the reason why.
Oh,
Thank
sorry
you.
about that.
Questions on these titles? Seeing none, we'll take consensus starting with Ms. Allenson.
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Levesque?
Yes.
Ms. Castelli?
Yes.
Mr. Votto?
Yes.
Purcell?
Yes.
That's not me.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
And Ms. Raccio?
Yes.
Thank you. And Ms. Corso is yes. Thank you, Ms. Laudadio.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Have a good night.
You too.
Why this freezes?
Okay, next, we're going to talk about a revised policy. So I don't know if Ms. Latour or Dr. Menzo want to take over.
So this policy has been in existence, as you can see, for quite some time. We typically have had a June 1st deadline for physicals for athletes. And due to our distance learning scenario and a lot of closures, we are going to revise this policy to align with the CIAC language of the 13 months rule for physicals to give our athletes a buffer with their current physicals while we are experiencing this pandemic. So the policy itself is pretty straightforward. The language that was revised is in accordance with the CIAC language to keep things consistent. This is a first read, so you will see this policy again at the end of the month at the full Board of Ed meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Latour. Does anybody have any questions? Ms. Castelli?
So I just want to confirm that basically, Carrie, this is just taking out the June deadline. That's
It is.
basically what it's doing.
Changing from a June 1st deadline to the 13-month rule. So it's still in accordance with CIAC regulations, and it just provides some flexibility for our athletes.
Thank you. Ms. Levesque?
Yes, I have a question on some of the wording towards the end, and for some reason I couldn't get this to print out, so I took some notes. And we can discuss this offline, but one of the issues I had was prudent written medical protocol as determined by his or her Board of Education. And I was really not clear about what exactly that meant.
I'm opening it now. This is the wording that you're referring to, Mrs. Levesque, has been in our policy for quite some time.
I think part of it was in an addition, though. It seemed like it was highlighted, at least on my copy.
Let's see.
On page 2, I think. I think there were 2 pages to this policy.
No, it's in the first paragraph at the end of the first paragraph. It starts with every athlete who participates. It's the
Yep.
highlighted in
That's
gray.
actually the language provided by the CIAC in accordance with their, recommendations for how it is written for our athletes. So I can find out some more information for you if you'd like.
It just seems kind of vague. Approved written medical protocol is determined by his or her Board of Education. That doesn't seem really specific. Seems nebulous to me. Not sure what that is supposed to mean, but we can discuss it after.
Yep, we can find out some more information for you, Mrs. Levesque.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Menzo.
Just to give everybody a point of information, this went through both athletic directors, both high school principals, the high school nurses, as well as the middle school nurses, and our nurse coordinator. So they all reviewed this and they all agreed unanimously that we should make the changes in order to meet the needs of our students at this time. So I just wanted to give you some context that it wasn't just a policy that central office came up with. This went through the appropriate people that are responsible for such things in our district.
Ms. Allenson?
Mrs. Castelli was first.
Oh, go ahead, Ms. Castelli.
Thanks. So do we have, to try to answer Karen's question or her concern about the medical protocol, because I think it's those 2 words that you have the most concern with. I don't mean to speak for you, Karen, but I'm thinking it's the medical protocol. So I'm assuming that we have some sort of medical protocol for what constitutes a physical exam, and
right.
That's what this would be referring to, right?
They're part of our administrative procedures. So we can, again, I have Danielle and I, Ms. Belizzi and I have a weekly meeting with our nurse coordinator on Tuesdays. So we could ask her just for clarification again tomorrow, but we have administrative procedures that our nurses use when they review the medical information that's provided from physicians. Dr. Valentin is also part of making sure that our protocols, because the nurses meet monthly with our doctor to go over the protocols. So we'll just clarify, because I think it's important just to make sure that it's written in language that people understand, so we can review that.
Thank you. Ms. Allenson and then Ms. Levesque.
It seems to be, and I'm in the same boat as Kathy, trying to demonstrate what it seems to be saying, but it seems that there is a form. So my guess is that would be the protocol as determined by the board. So if we could just, I don't know, see the form, that way we know exactly what we're approving. But other than that,
We do have a form. We have the traditional blue medical form that has to be filled out for registration. And then there is an additional form that's used for health physicals for athletes.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Ms. Levesque?
Yes, typically at the bottom of our policies, if there's a legal reference or what have you.
Right. There isn't one for this.
Well, perhaps if we at least reference what protocols that we have in the policy, or list, please see form, whatever, at least that will be a little more clear.
Okay, I'll note that. So when I speak with Mrs. Nealon, perhaps I can link directly to the district's form, because the Blue Health form is the state of Connecticut form, which changes every once in a while. It's just the regular health assessment record that you fill out when you go for your physical. But I will ask her about the district form.
And
if they reference, please see the state, physical form or the district, what have you. At least there'll be some reference in there, not that you're trying to guess what the written medical protocol might be.
We might also, just as and this might not need to be done, but I'm just wondering if at the bottom, since we usually reference why we have the policy or from where the policy came, so do we want to reference per CIC sports guidelines?
Yes.
There's a technical term for that. Just that it's right there that, 5 years from now, when you all are here, and we're trying to figure out where do we come up from, we'll be able to see that.
I think that's a good idea.
Sure. Thank you.
So-
Ms. Caselli? Ms. Caselli?
Trying to get off my mute here. Okay, so I think just to simplify it, when you read that paragraph or that sentence, it's obvious that it's coming from the CIAC itself. If we just end the sentence with within the past 13 months, in accordance with in accordance with Board of Education medical requirements, or something to that effect. Get rid. In other words, we don't have to make it sound like it's coming from the CIAC, which is what it sounds like here. Just clean it up so it's performed within the past 13 months in accordance with Board of Ed medical evaluation policy or evaluation protocol. Something to that effect, just to make it sound more like it's coming from us and not from the CIAC. Just a suggestion.
Okay, so pre-participating evaluation performed within the last 13 months in accordance with the Wallingford Board of Education medical evaluation protocol. Yes?
Sure.
Does that work for you, Karen?
Yeah, we
Karen,
still
does that work?
don't know what it is.
That certainly clarifies it because, prudent written medical protocol, you're not quite sure what that means. So this would be a little clearer.
Okay. And then in the reference section, I will add the CIAC regulation that requires this, and then reference perhaps the written document form that Mrs. Nealon has if it is agreeable to the board. So I'll have that for the second read.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ms. Latour.
Okay.
Okay, our next item of business is a continuation from from last week's meeting, discussion and possible action regarding the process for removal of agenda consent items. So we'll start with Ms. Purcell.
Thank you. I just had a question maybe for Dr. Menzo. I know that the idea you came up with, the Thursday at 9 a.m. or whatever, was kind of following the town council's idea and stuff like that, and that we could get it to the public in time. And one of the questions that came up is, how do we know what's on the consent agenda? Can we make sure, because we don't always see that right away. Although I know we do take consent on everything, but somebody may have forgotten or may not have been at the meeting or whatever. Could this consent agenda stuff be sent to us a couple days before Thursday, so people can look at it really quickly? And then that way they would know by Thursday morning what they might want to talk to you about?
I don't see why not. I wouldn't say necessarily a couple of days. I'm thinking at least 24 hours before you have to make a decision. Just because, sometimes there's a lot of moving parts and pieces, but I think the consent piece of the agenda is relatively something that is easy because it just moves. Once we get done with tonight's meeting, for example, that just moves from Carrie's department to my administrative assistant, Linda, and she already starts building the agenda for next month, or for the end of this month, rather. So I think as long as if you put together a timeline, if that's something that the board wants to consider, then we'll make it work.
Yeah, I was just trying to problem solve because that seemed to be one of the issues.
Sure.
Because I'd love to hear from everybody before we, have a huge discussion. If there's a lot of people that are against this Thursday one, then that's going to change the discussion. But if there's more people that kind of like it, but just kind of want to play with the idea a little bit, that would be nice to hear from everyone.
Ms. Allenson?
So I'm not for the Thursday thing. I was reading my handy book on Robert's rules here, and this was provided to me by CABE. Plus, I did a few searches for the extended Roberts rules because this is like an abbreviated in English version, which I don't know. I've never read parliamentary English before, but it's interesting. So, moving on, it says a consent agenda may be used for non-controversial business. I think defining controversial business is probably going to be a sticking point. But further on in the rules, it says the chair decides what is placed on the consent agenda. At the beginning of a meeting, the board chair asks members if any consent agenda items should be removed. And then if any member asks that an item be removed, it must be removed. So, I mean, Robert's Rules is pretty clear about it, and we seem to follow that policy on most other things. I'm more in favor of just following the policy because it's researchable and we have the backup for it. I don't see the point of not giving somebody time to, if we have a meeting like for operations this week and somebody voted one way and then they might vote another way, if you don't want to give people that opportunity, then put it in the main meeting. Otherwise, we all have the ability to change our minds about things at any time. So I think that we should follow Robert's rules as far as the suggestion is concerned.
Ms. Purcell?
All right, I don't need to take other turns. I just didn't see another hand. The town council does it that way, so I don't understand why they can do it that way. But I also think if you wait, you have more than a week from the time that you're there. Like if it's this meeting, you've got 3 weeks between now and them and the board meeting. And if it's the operations meeting, you have a full week, right? No, 2 weeks. So you do have plenty of time to voice. It's not like you're at the last minute, have to make a decision one way or the other. And I don't think anybody's against allowing someone to change their mind. I think they're just, to me, it's just the surprise factor. There's a couple things. The surprise factor of seeing one action changed at the last minute and of not being prepared to talk because you thought it was consented already. And also the administration not being able to have the people there that could back up and give you more information because it all of a sudden changed at the last minute.
Ms. Allison?
I do just want to respond to that quickly. In Robert's rules, it also says that just because something is on a consent agenda, it doesn't mean that the people in the backup should not be distributed or reviewed beforehand. So, I mean, we do all have the backups, and we do, if there was an item on the consent agenda that we might want to remove or that was controversial, and for any reason, I mean, a 5-4 vote is pretty controversial, then we might want to be prepared anyways, because that is in the rules also.
I don't follow what you're saying.
I'm saying as part of Robert's Rules of Order, it is a requirement, even if items are on the consent agenda, that the backups are distributed. So as part of that, if there was a vote on something and it was put on a consent agenda, rather than asking on Thursday to have it removed for Monday, why not just leave it on the consent agenda and follow the rules? And if there was something that was a vote of 5-4, I would consider that to be controversial enough that you might want to have your speakers there again, because there's still 4 dissenting votes, essentially.
But if it's 5-4, according to Robert's rules, it wouldn't go on the consent agenda to begin with. Because they're only putting non-controversial business on the consent agenda.
I agree with you.
I would disagree.
Mr. Votto, I'm sorry. Mr. Votto, you were next, and then Mr. Ross.
Dr. Menzel wanted to say something.
No, it's all right. Go. I'm fine.
I don't think that's what she was saying, Aaron. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think she said that if it's a 5-4 vote, it's controversial, therefore you take it off. Is that what you just said, Aaron?
That's what Robert's rules says, that consent agenda is only for when a non-controversial business.
All right, but the issue is, again, like I said the last time, how do you define controversial? Is it justify 4 vote? Is it 7-2?
Right.
Is it 6-3? I don't think we should get that much into the weeds. And as far as Robert's rules, we don't have to remove it, Allison, from Autumn, I'm sorry. I always switch your names, and even then I say it wrong. You don't have to remove it from the consent agenda on Thursday. Or you can just tell the chair out of courtesy through the secretary that you are going to do that. You're at the meeting, which is when you can do it. You can do it at the meeting, remove something from the consent agenda. So what's the problem with just calling up the secretary to tell the chair, I plan on removing this item that's going to come up on the consent agenda? Let's make it as simple as possible is what I'm going for.
I don't have a problem with that. And now that I understand the process a little bit better, and now that we've all talked about the process a little bit better, I'm sorry if I'm speaking out of turn, Aaron. I think that we all can align on something. I just don't think that it should be mandatory in order to remove something from the consent agenda, that it has to be done by Thursday. I'm perfectly happy being courteous.
Mr. Ross, you were next. Mr. Ross?
He looks like he's frozen. Oh, there he is. No, he's back now, I think.
Well, let's let Dr. Menzo go next.
No, I was just going.
Okay, is Allison through talking? I didn't think so. All right, well, yes, can you hear me?
Go ahead, Mr. Ross. Yes.
Am I back? Oh, okay, can you hear me? All right, who puts the items on?
We can't hear you now, Mr. Ross.
I heard.
How is the process work? All right, I'll repeat it. Who determines and who writes up the consent agenda? Is that done?
What happened? I can explain the process. So after tonight's meeting, tonight's a perfect example. After tonight's meeting, all the items that consent were taken on would then go from Carrie's secretary, who would come up with the minutes for this meeting. She would then send that information to my secretary, Linda, who would then she would already start developing the board meeting. So for example, later this week, the initial consent items from tonight's meeting would go on there. Next week after the operations meeting, those consent items would go on there. So that really would be established. The only things that would be added based on after those two meetings, in addition, would be any donations or any thank you notes or communications like you read at the board meeting. So those are the only things that are added that you would not, as a board, unless you were absent for one of those two meetings, you would not have been privy to.
All right, well, my question is, at what point is the board chairman involved in this?
She should always go.
Well, the board chair, none of these items, there's not anything new being added to the consent agenda. So the practice is that once you take consent at these meetings, the practice has been, and if you want to change the practice, fine. But the practice has been is that because consent had been taken, they're automatically added to the consent agenda. The only items that traditionally, which predate this process, obviously predates me, but the only item that does not go on the consent agenda, and it never has, is the budget vote. That always goes under operations for you to take a roll call vote.
And can I also add that any policies that we approved used to go under the instructional committee part of that agenda too. They were never part of the consent agenda.
Right.
That has been changed for a while.
Ms. Purcell and then Mr. Ross.
Just a quick one. So I assume, Dr. Menzo, that the chair gets the agenda ahead of time, right? For approval, like we do for instructional or for operations?
I don't believe so, just because, again, the agenda is set based on what has already occurred. If there's
Okay.
something that's going to be added to the agenda, then it's myself. I usually would reach out to the board chair and say that we have to add something. But the board agenda is set, it's predetermined by all your work. We don't do, which I think is unique for this board and compared to other boards, you do everything as a board of the whole. If you did this as a committee and say, for example, the board chair was not part of a committee, then there's that, I think that's been the past practice. And again, it predates me, my 11 years here. So, again, we serve the board. Whatever you choose to do, just tell us the rules you want to play by and we'll play by them. But we just need to know what they are.
All right. And I would just also ask, like Adam, I know you said you want to be courteous, and that's all this is really all about in my mind. So I'd love to hear what the suggestion of being courteous would be down the line. But I think the chair's next. So.
Actually, so we have Mr. Ross, then Ms. Castelli, and then Ms. Levesque.
Okay.
All right. Well, my opinion is that since it's a board thing, the chairman of the board should see the agenda before it goes into print. And I know we had a discussion about what's controversial, and I think that should be a decision of the board chairman. I feel that when it's a 5-4 vote, and I don't want to say a 6-2 or 7-2 or whatever, but I think that it bears more talking about. So I would not want to see anything that goes on the consent agenda that wasn't approved 100%, that wasn't approved 100% by the board at the committee meeting.
Thank you. Ms. Castelli?
Okay, so I don't agree that this is what how I feel. We should, if we feel something should be removed from the consent agenda, then don't put it there to begin with. So in the instance of a 5-4 vote, that means all 9 members of the board were present. We all had our opportunity to speak our minds, to ask our questions, to develop our personal opinion and our personal vote. 5-4 in a democracy means it passes. Now, if people are still that upset about something at that particular point, then we should say, don't move this to consent. It needs to continue being talked about here in committee. That would be my opinion on a 5-4 vote when you are all there. Now, I can see if it's someone, 1 or 2 people are missing and they didn't have an opportunity, because I don't think any of us are. We're all very conscientious, and if we miss a meeting, it's for a very legitimate reason. And I hate to stifle anybody's opinions because they had a legitimate reason not to be at the meeting. So if it's something like that, and still seems very, it only passed by 1 vote, but there's 1 or 2 people missing, maybe we say, you know what, let's make sure we get everybody's opinion on this first, and let's not move it forward. In other words, just have that conversation at the committee level. We may decide, even though someone's missing, doesn't matter, it's a 7-1 vote, we're going to move it forward because 1 more vote isn't going to matter, isn't going to change it, that kind of thing. So just my opinion.
Ms. Levesque, and then Mr. Ross.
Yes, thank you. I'm going back to Robert's rules because there is no specific policy that we have regarding this that I could find. But I'm looking at what it states, it's routine and non-controversial. Fine. And most of our things are. We usually have a long discussion about things in committee and hash it out and what have you. For this particular issue that we ended up discussing this about, sometimes, and it could be this issue or something else, sometimes more information is needed, but it's been discussed a lot and you want to move it along. And that's the desire of the group. In that case, I mean, I know for the specific issue that we were speaking of, I had requested more information about including persons that had developmental disabilities that they could participate in this particular study or survey. So, I mean, sometimes it depends on what the topic is or what information you're looking for. I've seen things passed onto the board, but typically if there's a question of more information needed, et cetera, it won't be on consent. It will be under the committee that it came up under so that there can be further information provided. But usually it's the routine things that we all agree on, just as we did this evening. I mean, it's usually a unanimous vote. And this doesn't come up that often. I mean, in the entire time I've been on the board, it's come up very infrequently about taking things off consent. But that's just my 2 cents on the topic.
Mr. Ross?
Yeah, I'm the one that asked it to come off the consent agenda, and I'm the one that changed my vote. I'm upset that I'm hearing here that once we do a consent at the committee level, we have no right to change our vote, even if we have more information. Which
No, that's not
would
what we're
change
saying.
it. Well,
What are
we're
you saying?
excuse me, do I have the floor?
I guess.
Yep.
Do I have the floor?
Yes.
Thank you. As I was saying, it was mentioned tonight that we had our opportunity to do it, and that we knew what was coming up, and we had the time to do it. All I'm saying is that sometimes information becomes available to the person that voted, which had he had that night, it would have changed his vote. And because of that, my vote was affirmative, and I came up with information from constituents later that made me want to change my vote. That's why it came off the consent agenda, and that's why I changed my vote. We should all have that right to do this at any time. Thank you.
Dr. Menzo?
I'll just say, Mr. Ross, I didn't hear anybody say that you don't have that right. I think the question, and I think Ms. Allison appropriately said it, is out of courtesy, letting others know you were going to do that. That's the responsibility of a board that works together. So having the courtesy to even let the board chair know, I think that's what we're talking about, is coming up with a protocol so that, and it wasn't your fault. You weren't trying to be discourteous. It was just that we need a protocol so that Ms. Levac, as board chair, she knows that that's going to happen, as well as yourself or whomever is going to do that. So I think that's really the crux of this. And if I may, I think you have 2 options. Or 3 options. You leave it the way it is, and with the idea that if you're going to take something off, and at the 11th hour, 5 minutes before the meeting, you just let Ms. Levac know. That's number 1. Number 2, that you do the Thursday thing, which it sounds like we probably would have a controversial vote, so we wouldn't be able to move forward on that one. And then the last one is that you decide as a board, like I said last week, as another option was that anything that's not unanimous, you don't move forward to consent. You put it under the instructional agenda, or you put it under operations. I think that's really what you're coming to at this point. I don't know if there are other options, and if there are, of course, talk about them, but I'm thinking that those are your 3 main buckets that you have to kind of, and maybe you want to narrow one out. Maybe you want to take consensus on one that doesn't work, and just try to focus on the one or 1 or 2 that might be able to work. Because I think everybody's saying the same thing, that you want to be respectful, you want to be heard, and I 100% agree with that.
Mr. Votto?
Again, let's just go back to that courtesy word. And let me preface this by saying this is no attack on you, Ray. I think we leave things the way they are, but in the case where we do have a 5-4 vote, and it was a touchy subject maybe, I think if you are a person who's going to change the way something goes, the way we decided, like the 5-4 vote, I mean, if it was 7-2 and you change your vote, it's not going to make a difference. But in a 5-4 vote, if you feel you want to change your vote, what's just a common courtesy of letting the chair know, so they can let the other board members know there's a thing that one item that we had a 5-4 vote on is going to be removed from the consent agenda. I mean, the times that it happens is probably how many? Does it ever happen? Very seldom. Instead of making all this problem for ourselves, just do that. have the courtesy as one of 9 of us, we all working for the best here, for the best of our kids, just have that courtesy to call up and say, I'm going to remove that item that was a 5-4 vote so that we can discuss it again and let the other people know, period. And I would further suggest that policy committee, whenever we do meet again, this is the first policy we work on.
Ms. Costelli?
Okay, so 2 things I forgot to mention earlier. One was, Autumn, you had brought up in Robert's rules, it talked about that all the backup information has to be available at the meeting when something is on the consent agenda. But that wouldn't be my stuff. My notes wouldn't be part of that backup information. So I would want to make sure I had access to my own personal notes. So I'm kind of in favor of the Thursday morning thing. The other thing I've heard in some of the conversation, not tonight, I think it was at the last meeting, we talked about this. Some people want to remove something from the consent agenda so that people can publicly hear how they voted, because they didn't, maybe they didn't vote for the way it's passing. All of our meetings are recorded, so your voice was heard and your vote was heard by the people. So that doesn't have to be pulled off the consent agenda, just so you can once again publicize how you voted. You've already done that. I just wanted to point that out. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a quick clarification, something I want clarification on. So if we were to not put something on a consent agenda, because it's a controversial issue, so we don't put it on a consent agenda and we put it in the full board meeting under either instructional or operations, that doesn't mean we're not voting on it that night, correct?
Correct.
That just means that we will put it there, potentially discuss it more, and then vote on it that night.
Correct. We would most likely put discussion and possible action. So it gives you an opportunity to discuss it more. If you choose to vote on it, you have the ability, because it's on the agenda, to take action. If not, you could still discuss it and put it on the next agenda.
Who decides whether or not we vote that night?
You all do. You
So
do.
you're right back.
Whether we're going to vote that night?
Correct. We don't decide that. We don't decide that I wouldn't decide that as superintendent.
No, I'm saying, is it everybody, or is it the chair of that committee that decides whether or not it gets voted on that night?
No.
I mean, I would defer to Ms. Levac on her opinion on that.
Usually, the discussion will dictate if there's agreement one way or the other. And then sometimes if there isn't, someone will invoke a tabling motion. So it all depends on it. As I said before, though, these things over time, and Mr. Votto can, weigh in on this as well. This has come up very infrequently over my many terms on the board, and perhaps, he can weigh in on this as well. It doesn't come up that often.
I think, go ahead.
I don't know. I just think it was the issue of being blindsided by something. That's it. And maybe nobody meant to do that, but again, just common courtesy. I mean, let's just leave things and just say, if you're going to take something off like that, that's going to change a vote, just let the board know ahead of time, period. I mean, what's so hard about it?
The only concern that I go back to that I mentioned the last time was that you don't want to have a non-meeting occur, or an illegal meeting occur. So that's the only challenge. So
I don't understand that illegal meeting, because
because
email each other.
Well, yes, because as soon as you start emailing each other and you're discussing board business outside a publicized meeting, that becomes potentially an illegal meeting. So I wouldn't want to. I mean, good intentions. Again, good intentions can sometimes be misinterpreted, and I know none of you have bad intentions. That's not why you volunteered all the hours you do. You do not go into this trying to upset people or do things wrong. None of you. So the thing is, I don't want to set you up for that. But I think that, again, I think the thing that this brings forward, and I think Mr. Ross, I appreciate it, even though this is, a lot of discussion, I appreciate this coming up, because I think now, if something like this were to occur again at the committee level, there needs to be really thoughtful conversation before consent is taken. And even after consent is taken, whomever's in charge of that committee, if it is a 5-4, as you were all discussing, then you have a conversation. Does this go right to consent, or does this go for discussion at the board meeting? But I appreciate the fact that this is brought up, because obviously, again, hopefully this doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't become the rule of thumb, which I doubt it will. But it's an important conversation to have. And there was, again, you're all coming at it from a place of goodness. And I think that's that's why we get along as a team, and you all do too. But these moments happen. So that's all. I mean, I'll pause there.
Ms. Corso, you're muted. Are you trying to?
Go ahead, Ms. Purcell. Sorry.
Okay, I just wanted to hear from, like, we didn't hear from Ms. Raccio, any thoughts? And I don't know if you gave us a lot of thoughts. I just would like to hear from all the different members, their thoughts.
Sure. I agree with Dr. Menzo. The value of telling the board chair, I agree that's a courtesy, but she can't do anything with that information. She can't call everybody in advance and tell them, Tammy or Ray or Patty or Aaron, change their vote, because it's an illegal meeting. So I would always tell the board chair, and I've called Dr. Menzo and given him advance notice on things that I wasn't going to support. But it doesn't go around the whole board, because that's an illegal meeting.
Well, I'm not so sure of that. I've had board chairs email everybody and say, there's a varsity. I don't get that.
Mr. Votto,
You just glitched out. We heard you say you've had board chairs email, and then you went out.
Yeah, they'll email us and say, we have a varsity scholar banquet dinner at Lyman Hall on May 14th. Can anybody go to that and represent the board? That email goes to every board member. That's not an illegal meeting.
But that's different. That's not, you didn't take action on that. This is something, we're talking about something that you actually took official board action on. So information and setting a calendar is different than actually discussing an item that was already voted upon.
Well, then we call the superintendent.
Could we do this? Could, if someone changes their vote, they tell the chair tells Dr. Menzo, and then it goes from consent and it goes on to the individual, either operations or instructional committee meeting, and that's our signal to know that something is changed.
I understand that, but what if over the weekend information comes to light? I don't want to not be able to take something off the consent agenda because I missed the Friday full board agenda. I mean, I understand courtesy. What I really think needs to happen is at the committee meetings, when we vote initially, if it's a controversial vote, we decide right there that it's not going on the consent agenda, and that the full board meeting, it either goes under instructional or operations. I think that's the best way to proceed. Just decide at the committee meetings. Anybody else? So I think we're either that or decide at the committee meetings, or we leave things the way they are currently. I think that's what we've kind of narrowed things down to. Dr. Menzo?
We've lost Mr. Votto.
Hopefully he'll come back. 4, 5. So what do we have? We're down to 7. So why don't I kind of get the feel of the board, and you can tell me, if when I call your name, you can tell me what you would prefer to do. Either leave things the way they are, or decide at the committee meetings whether things come off. Now, the only other issue with that is if you're not at the committee meeting, you read through the things and you want it off. That would be the only other issue.
That's the problem.
Yeah. So maybe we just need to leave things the way they are. Ms. Allenson?
I am in favor of leaving things the way they are, and just by saying, if we know that it, like in advance, do the best we can to notify everybody that, or to notify whoever that we're going to ask to move something off consent, because that is not an illegal meeting, because as long as you don't share your vote, you're not discussing the item. So you can say, I'm going to request to move this off of consent, and you can do that in advance with courtesy, and that's absolutely fine. And you know, but otherwise, if you know something comes to light, to your point, in the like the day before, I don't want to lose the opportunity to say, hey, I'd like to remove this and from consent, and you know, then we all. So I think that leaving it the way it is, but with the understanding that we're all kind of courteous to each other when we know in advance.
Thank you. Ms. Levesque?
Yes, I think we can leave things as they are. And you know, if so desired and this becomes an issue, it certainly can be addressed again. But I think for now, and with my experience on the board for quite some time, this doesn't come up very often. And usually board members are very courteous. I know with the prior board chairs, they have come and said, look, I'm uncomfortable with something, or I have new information since the last meeting, and I really would like to pull this off consent and have a chat about that. So I think for the time being, leave it as is. And then if it becomes an issue, which I hope it doesn't, then it can be revisited.
Ms. Castelli?
I just want to ask a question. I agree, probably it's best to leave things as is. However, what I want to know is if, let's say I wanted to remove a controversial 5-4 vote item off of consent, could it also be suggested and bring it back to committee for further discussion because more information has come to light, rather than discussing it right there at that meeting? Or
I think you have the option to table that at that point, correct? So you would make a motion to table
it?
the.
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, because I think not everybody might have all of their materials with them when they're hearing that it's being pulled from consent. That's why I'd like to see it go back to committee. Okay.
Mr. Ross?
Yeah, I'm in favor of leaving it like it is. And I had no intention to blindside anybody or do anything wrong when I asked her to come off that day. Had I used my head, maybe I would have notified the chair Saturday afternoon when I had people call me. But aside from that, I'm for leaving it like it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Purcell?
I just think that the chair has to be notified as soon as you've changed your mind. But I also think that in committee, if it's 5-4, we have to really seriously talk, you know, before we take consensus, and we may have taken it too quickly, we have to really kind of fill out the board like we are now and say, you know, do we really want to take consensus at this point, or do we want to, you know, spend a little more time and get a little more information before we take consensus? So if you know, the operations chair and the instructional chair, before you run right to consensus, if it seems really kind of feel out the board on some of these issues that are kind of controversial before we take consensus, and maybe we'll avoid this problem in the future.
Noted. That's a good point, Ms. Purcell. Mr. Votto? You're muted.
I hit a button and I lost you all. What are you asking me?
So you leave things the way they are, or we're kind of trying to decide if we should leave things the way they are and be courteous to each other if we know to remove it from the consent agenda, or if it's not a unanimous vote to begin with, it doesn't go on the consent agenda.
I like the courteous thing. Leave it the way it is, but with courtesy, you call up and let them know you're taking it off.
Thank you. Ms. Raccio?
Leave it as is.
Oh, so then we all agreed on that. Because I agree on that too. Leave it the way it is, but just be courteous of each other. So at least we all agreed on that one. Okay. So any other comments or questions?
Could I just clarify?
Yes.
because I want to make sure that this is understood, that the act of actually informing somebody what happened or your feelings is not an illegal meeting. But what ends up oftentimes happening, not on this board, but has been the case for issues in other scenarios in other communities, is that conversation ensues. And what ends up happening is opinions start formulating in further emails, which that becomes an illegal board meeting. So I just want to clarify, the actual act of communicating an announcement is not an illegal board meeting, but oftentimes it's in our society, everybody replies all and they share their opinion, and then it becomes this whole chain of emails that now you have discussed the topic. And that's my only caution, because I know your intent as 9 members, having worked with most of you for many, many years now, is always good. And I just don't want that to be misconstrued by anybody, because you all have good intentions. You wouldn't volunteer, as I said earlier, the amount of time, and Mr. Ross, I know you didn't do it intentionally. It just happened. So that's the only reason why I say that. I'm just trying to be the protective person for all of you. So I apologize if I'm being overprotective, but I just don't want you to misstep.
Thank you. Mr. Votto?
Thanks for that explanation, Dr. Menzo. Number 2, are we talking just about a 5-4 vote kind of thing, where we would call up to do that courtesy call? Are we talking like, even if it's 7 to 2, and we're going to change our vote, we should call and let the chair know?
Out of courtesy, I think that's what we're saying, is if you're going to change it at some
Anytime.
point, you can call and let Karen know. But I don't think, I really like Ms. Purcell's point about whether or not we should rush to consensus to begin with. I think that's important. I really appreciate Ms. Purcell bringing this to light to begin with, because I know I learned a lot about consent agendas through this whole process as well. So I do appreciate that. So as is, we'll leave things as is, and we'll be courteous of each other by informing the board chair if and when we know whether or not we're going to change our vote. Is there any other questions or comments for the night? Ms. Castelli?
I just assume we don't have to take action on this because we're leaving it as is, so we don't have to make a motion or anything.
I think we should take
Right.
consent.
we did, sort of. We sort of did.
Okay. Just trying to follow Robert's rules.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.